Hey everyone, today we are sewing up the Cassiopeia East West Bag from Oro Rosa Patterns. This is a mid-sized bag measuring 14 inches wide, 6.5 inches tall, and 4 inches deep. It has 2 zippered pockets on the inside, 2 slip pockets on the inside, and a large main compartment. This pattern also features the signature Oro Rosa handles. This bag is finished with binding on the inside and comes together very quickly and can be sewn up on your domestic machine. So, let's get going. Before we start, it's assumed that all of your interfacing and stabilizer has been fused per the pattern instructions and that all of the markings have been placed on your pattern pieces. Let's get organized into packs. Pack 1, the handles and main panel, 2 sets. Pack 2, the zippered pocket main lining for side 1. Pack 3, zippered pocket main lining side 2. Pack 4, zipper panels and gusset pieces, and you will also need binding for the final construction. Retrieve your pack 1, your 2 handle pieces, and your 2 main panels. Working with one handle at a time, take a pen, a ruler, rotary cutter or scissors, and some double-sided tape. We're going to start by drawing a line straight down the center of a handle piece. We're now going to make a mark 3/4 of an inch in from the short edges and 3/4 of an inch in from the long edges. Use your rotary cutter or scissors to just trim off that corner piece. You'll do that 4 times. This is going to help reduce the bulk in the bottom seam of our bag. Take your double-sided tape and run it down the center line, then fold the long edges in to meet in the center. If you have thicker vinyl, I recommend leaving a tiny gap between the long edges so that you can do the second fold without too much trouble. When I'm folding my long edges in, I start in the middle and work my way out, making sure that I am folding directly across to the center line so that I don't have any twisting in my strap. Fold the handle in half again to fully enclose the long raw edges and clip it in place, lining up those folded outside edges. I'm now going to top stitch this strap at 1/4 of an inch from both outside edges, making sure that the gap in the center of our handle is big enough for a rivet to fit without affecting any of your stitching. I am using a walking foot. I will be increasing my tension because I am sewing through 4 layers of vinyl. I'm using part of my presser foot here as a guide so that I get an even top stitch all the way around, and I will be back stitching in the end of my handle where it will be hidden in the seam allowance when we sew the outside edge of the bag. Sewing down the open side first. Using a removable pen or painter's tape, make a mark that is 5 inches up from the short end and 6 inches up from the short end at both sides of your handle. We're now going to sew a rectangle between the innermost marks that we just made. So those are the 6-inch marks. We're going to start at the side where the folded edges of the strap are so that we can bury our threads between the layers. Sew all the way around up to 1 6-inch mark, sew across, come down the folded side and sew back across the other end, taking long tails, and then we will pull our threads through between the layers to tie them off, sewing a rectangle between those 2 lines. Go to where your tails are and open up the fold in your handle and gently coax through the tails. I use the blunt end of a needle and just gently pull on the threads. Check that you haven't missed any stitches, and then tie a knot in those threads and then feed it back between the layers. Take your double-sided tape and you're going to run a strip from the 5-inch mark that we made all the way to the short end of the strap. The same on both sides. Retrieve one of your main lining pieces and mark the center top and center bottom. Using a removable ink pen, measure and mark a line that is 2.5 inches from the center to either side, so that you have a gap of 5 inches between your two lines. Take your handle and with the folded edge facing towards the center of the panel, remove the backing from the double-sided tape and align the folded edge with the line that we just drew, keeping it flush at the bottom and pressing it down right up against that line. I like to place a couple of clips at the top here so that it maintains its position. Remove the backing from the other side of the handle. Line it up at the bottom also. Make sure that there's no twists and that the folded side is facing in. And press that down, lining up with the other drawn line. The handle should be parallel with a 5-inch gap between them. You can check that with your ruler. If you can't see the line that you made that was 5 inches up from the short edge, you can draw that in again or use painter's tape to mark it. We're now going to sew around the lower part of the handle at 1/8 of an inch, sewing through the handle and the main panel. We're going to start at the bottom, sew all the way up, pivot at the line, cross over and come back down, doing the same thing for both handle ends. Repeat all of those steps for the second main panel and handle. Take your 4 sets of rivets and you're going to mark and punch a hole just above that lower stitch line and set a rivet. You want to make sure that the hole is centered in your strap and not going through any of your stitches. Set those rivets and then repeat the steps for the second panel. Retrieve your Pack 2 zippered main pocket lining. Working first with your zipper tape and your pocket lining piece, you're going to center the zipper so that it is on the short side of your zipper lining. If you're using a directional print, you will have the direction going this way. Make sure that that zipper tape is centered on that pocket lining. It will be longer than the pocket lining piece and based along the upper edge. Take your zipper pocket backing and you're going to place it right sides down on your basted zipper and the right side of your pocket lining piece. Lining up the short edge of that zipper pocket backing with the upper edge of that zipper tape. We're going to sew along here at 3/8 of an inch, sewing through the zipper pocket backing, the zipper teeth, and the zipper pocket lining. Double-sided tape can help if you're having trouble with the layers shifting as you sew. With the wrong side of the zipper pocket backing facing up, you're going to fold it around and up and over the upper edge of that zipper pocket, wrapping it around the seam allowance from the line of stitches we just made. I find creasing it as I go helps me to get a nice, neat fold. You can also place double-sided tape in that seam allowance. You want the edge of that seam allowance to be tucked right up into the fold. You can use an iron or a seam roller to press that down, and then we're going to double top stitch this wrapped edge. So we're going to sew one line of top stitching that is 1/8 of an inch from this upper folded edge, and a second line of top stitching that is 1/8 of an inch from the edge of the zipper. We now need to sew the lower half of that zipper pocket to the lower half of this zipper. Fold the zipper pocket backing out of the way, and you can either fold the lining up without pulling apart your zipper tape and baste along this lower edge, or you can open up your zipper tape to make it a little easier. Before you open your zipper tape, I recommend taking a look to see which side the zipper tooth is sticking further out from, so that when you place your zipper pull on and you line the zipper tape back up, you can line it back up evenly so that your pocket will be nice and straight at the sides. So for me, mine is on this upper side, so I'm just going to put a tiny little mark within the last 1/4 to 1/8 of an inch of that zipper tape. Another thing that I'm going to do before I open up my zipper is just make sure that it's nicely lined up, so that my pocket edges will be nice and straight. So I'm going to clip in a couple of spots first. And then I can open out that zipper tape, knowing that my positioning is correct. And then I will baste the lower half of this zipper to the lower half of that zipper pocket lining. Take your zipper pocket front, and if you have a directional print, you want to place it so that the directional print is facing up, and then place it down this way. So on the lower half of your zipper, it's facing this way, and then place it right sides together down on that zipper tape. And we're going to clip along, and then we'll sew that at 3/8 of an inch. So we have the right side of the zipper front. If it's a directional print, it's facing this way to the right. We have the teeth down on that zipper pocket front, and then we have the zipper pocket lining that is already basted to the back of that zipper tape and sewing along this edge at 3/8 of an inch. If you have trouble keeping your zipper tape positioned on your material, you can use double-sided tape to keep it in place. Fold the zipper pocket lining and the zipper pocket front away from the zipper teeth. And then top stitch below that zipper tape on the fold, sewing through the zipper pocket front, the seam allowance there with the zipper tape, as well as the pocket lining, which does not reach all the way to the edges. Sewing 1/8 of an inch below the zipper tape through all of those layers. Double check that that zipper pocket lining has not rolled up closer to the zipper teeth than you would like. And now we can place our zipper pull. Going to the side that we marked earlier, we're going to place our zipper pull by first sliding it on that side, and then bringing the other side up to meet it within that zipper head. Slide it down and push it on from the back. And make sure that the tooth that you marked as being the first tooth remains in that position. Slide your pull all the way off to completely close up your zipper. Check that it lines up. And then slide it on again, leaving it in the middle of that zipper. Lift up the front of that zipper pocket as well as the back, and we need to sew the sides of the zipper pocket lining. We're going to be sewing from the folded edge to the zipper, or from the zipper down to the folded edge, whichever is your preference. I prefer to start at the top edge and sew down, so I will start here, sew straight down, back stitching at the beginning and the end, and then I will flip my piece over and do the same thing, making sure that I am not sewing past where the fold is that marks where the top stitching on my zipper pocket piece is, so that I'm not pinching the zipper pocket front. So again, making sure that my stitches remain below where this stitch line here is, which is where this fold is. I'm going to sew down this edge at 3/8 of an inch, back stitching at the beginning and at the end, but making sure that I don't sew into that fold. And then making sure that I'm keeping my zipper pocket nice and smooth. I'm going to flip it over so I can still sew from the top down, making sure that I am not sewing that fold again. The lower edge of my pocket is nice and smooth. Back stitch. Double check that I haven't caught the front of my zipper pocket. And then I can trim the seam allowance at the side here. Retrieve your two side panels and fold the zipper pocket backing up. And you want to match the height of your center piece with the height of your side panels. The other thing to consider though is where the fold at the bottom of your panel is. You don't want it to get caught in the bottom seam of your bag. So I like to make sure that my fold is at least 1/2 inch from the lower edge. And then I will just crease that, flip it over, make sure that the sides are straight and the top is straight, and then check the height. And it's pretty close. It's a little taller, but I don't want to make it any lower than that because I'm scared that I'm going to catch the fold at the bottom of this pocket in my seams or my binding. So I'm going to attach these side panels and then I will just trim the upper edge. I'm going to baste down this edge before attaching the side panel, just at 1/8 of an inch from the top down to the bottom, and then the same on the other side. Take your side pieces and line up the lower edge and the side here. If you have any mismatch in the height of your center panel and your side panels, keep that at the top. Sew the side panels to the center panel at 3/8 of an inch, backstitching at the top and the bottom. I'll also be using my stiletto to make sure that I have got a snug seam where the bulk of the pocket is. Trim the seam allowance of the side panels only, leaving the center panel intact. Fold open the side panels and press them away from the center panel. I'm going to grab my ruler and I'm just going to trim the little bit of excess at the top there. Then top stitch the side panels on the fold away from the center panel. Top stitching through the seam allowance and the side panel. Turn your piece over and trim the top and bottom corners to reduce bulk, taking care not to cut through your panel or your stitch line. Retrieve your pack 3, the other zippered pocket main lining, and repeat all of those steps for the second combination zipper and slip pocket. For the final construction of your main panel, you will pair up an exterior and a lining piece so that the right sides are facing out and the wrong sides are together. Clip them around the outside edge. You can use center markings to help. Clip all the way around so that we can baste the exterior and the lining together. Make sure that your handle is tucked out of the way. And then baste the lining to the exterior all the way around the outside at 1/8 of an inch, making sure that you don't sew into your handle. Do the same for both panels. Using your main exterior panel as a guide, trim any areas where the lining overhangs the edge. Then set those panels aside and grab your pack 4. Starting with these lower gusset pieces, mark your centers, and if you're going to be placing purse feet on your bag, go ahead and do that now. I am not going to be placing purse feet. The instructions for doing so are included in the written pattern. Working with your zipper panel pieces, take your 16-inch zipper and lay it wrong side down on the right side of your lining piece and clip along the upper edge. Making sure that the zipper teeth are facing up and the lining is facing up, baste along the upper edge at 1/8 of an inch. Once you've basted along that long edge, take one of your exterior zipper panel pieces and place it right sides together with the zipper teeth and clip along the long edge. Double check that you have your layers ordered correctly. You want the right side of the zipper panel exterior face down on your zipper teeth, which is wrong sides down on the right side of your lining zipper panel. And you're going to sew along this edge at 3/8 of an inch. You're using a scant 3/8 of an inch seam allowance, which means that it is exactly 3/8 of an inch once you fold over your zipper panel. Backstitch at the beginning and the end, and don't be afraid to check your seam allowance to make sure that it is accurate. Once you've checked your seam allowance to make sure that it is straight and accurate, press the zipper panel lining and the zipper panel exterior away from the zipper tape and fold it so that we can then top stitch through both the exterior and the lining at 1/8 of an inch. You can use clips or double-sided tape to hold the zipper panel back away from those zipper teeth so you can top stitch without your zipper panels rolling towards your zipper teeth. Repeat the steps for the second side of your zipper panel, making sure that the spacing on either side of your zipper teeth is even and that you have the layers of your zipper panel ordered correctly. Once that's top stitched, take your 2 zipper pulls and we need to place one at either end of the zipper panel. There is a trick to making sure that your zipper pulls line up evenly in the middle and that your zipper panel remains even at either end. So you're going to take a look at your zipper tape and one of the teeth will be sticking further out at the end. So for me, this is on the right side, so I'm going to put a little mark just within the last 1/4 of an inch of the zipper tape and the same at the other end. And then when I place my zipper pull, this is the tooth that I want to remain further out. I'm going to open out my zipper tape, going to place my pull first on that side, slide it down so I can just see the zipper teeth right at the back end of the pull, slide the other side up, and then I'm going to push the pull from the back. And on this end, my mark is on the left side, so I want to make sure that my left side tooth is the furthest out and that there's no gaps. Slide the pull on. On the other end, the first side I marked, it's on the right-hand side. So I'm going to open my zipper tape out, slide my pull on to that side first. I can see my zipper teeth just inside the pull at the end. Slide the left side up until I can feel the meat. Push from the back, make sure that the right side is further out, which it is, and then when I slide them to the middle, my pulls will meet up perfectly. Retrieve your 2 gusset pieces and you're going to place the gusset exterior right sides down on your zipper panel, lining up the edge. You want to center your zipper panel up on your gusset panel. It's okay if the zipper panel is slightly narrower than your gusset. Take your gusset lining piece and place it right sides together with the underside of your zipper panel. And we're then going to sew this edge at 3/8 of an inch. we have our exterior gusset piece, the exterior of our zipper panel, the lining of the zipper panel, and then the lining of our gusset. Trim the seam allowance of the gusset exterior only down to 1/8 of an inch, and then we will fold both the exterior and lining of the gusset piece out over that seam allowance and top stitch. We're top stitching along here on the fold at 1/8 of an inch. Fold the open end of your gusset around so it is right sides together with the zipper panel, and then fold the gusset lining piece so that it is right sides together with the underside, the lining side of that gusset panel. And then we're going to clip that in place and sew along here through all of those layers at 3/8 of an inch. You now have a loop for your exterior gusset pieces and your lining gusset pieces. We're going to trim back the seam allowance of just the exterior lower gusset piece, and then we will turn the gussets out to create a single loop and top stitch along that end of the zipper panel, the same way as we did for the other side, sewing through the exterior and the lining and the seam allowance of the zipper panel. You have your loop like this, and then you're going to be sewing along here. It may be easier to do if you turn your loop inside out and then sew down here. We're now going to baste the gusset loop together around the outside edge, sewing the lining to the exterior. I find it works best if I sew with the lining side down, lining up my center markings to make sure that there's no shifting. I'm sewing with the lining down on the feed dogs as that is the lighter of my two materials, and that will help to reduce any shifting. After you've basted around the entire gusset loop, retrieve your two completed main panel pieces, clips, stapler, and a pair of scissors. The first thing that we need to do is mark our centers. If you haven't marked the centers on your main panels, mark the center top and the center bottom. We're also going to mark the centers on our gusset circle by lining up the side seam and marking the center top on both sides. Check the placement of the center bottom marks. And if you haven't made those yet, go ahead and place those also. Working first with your front main panel, you can choose which one that is. It may or may not be obvious. I'm going to go with the one that does not have my tag on it. Working with the front first because the first side is somewhat easier to install. What we need to do is clip the gusset circle to the exterior. We're going to be turning our gusset so that the exterior is in and the lining is out, and line up the center marking on the zipper panel with the center top of the exterior, the center bottom at the bottom here, and then we will work our way around. You want to make sure that your handle is tucked out of the way. And I'm going to clip along the upper edge, first on the straight part, stopping when I get to the curve. And then on the bottom. Then, leaving the curves for the moment, I'm just going to staple baste along the straight edge at the bottom and at the top, removing one clip at a time to place the staple. Again, starting in the center and working my way out, just stapling within the seam allowance. Do the same thing for the straight section at the bottom. Once you've staple basted the straight top and bottom sections, we need to ease the remainder of the gusset circle around the curved outer edge. Flatten the straight edges and smooth your gusset circle out towards the edge of your bag and place a clip. And what I'm then going to do is just place some small snips in the gusset circle so that I can ease it out to meet the edge of our curve. If your zipper section, the zipper panel section of your gusset circle is slightly narrower than the base of your bag, that is okay. That is to help the bag to look more balanced when it is finished. You can just graduate the gap here and ease it out to the curve so that you will have a tapering on your finished bag. Place clips to keep that curve in place and then staple baste the same way as we did for the straight sections. Or if you prefer, you can use hand stitches to baste the gusset to the curve. Flattening out the gusset can help you to get a more secure staple, but we will go around and flatten all of the prongs when we have finished placing all of those staples. Repeat for the lower corner, just making those small snips in the gusset circle to ease that around the outer edge of your bag. It's okay if it takes a little bit of time to get this step right. If you can correctly position your gusset, it will make sewing the outside seam and then doing your binding a lot easier. We're just trying to get that curve to push up to the edge. When it's the last little bit of a section, it does get a little trickier. I'm just going to use my clips, then place that staple. Gosh. I am really struggling with this today. I am going to hand baste that. I'm just really struggling to get this last little corner here to line up. So what I'm going to do instead of staple basting is just grab a needle and thread. I'm just going to poke it through and I'm just going to do a whip stitch over the edge. And that's just going to do a better job of holding that in place up to the edge of my main panel. And then the other side, do the same thing. Smooth it out. Try to line up the point where the edge of your gusset is. You can even use a ruler to mark that to make sure that it's even. Staple in the straight section. Then I'm going to put those snips in at the area of the curve. That will allow me to pull the gusset circle out to meet the curve. You want to get the gusset circle as close as you can to the edge of the main panel of your bag. And after fighting with the other side, I may end up just hand basting it, but you can also try just turning it the other way around. I'm going to flatten the gusset out as much as I can. I'm going to place my clips, and then this one I am just going to hand baste. So I've got it clipped right up to the edge. I'm just going to grab a needle and thread, and then I'm just going to hand baste that in place. So it's a little slow, but I found it less frustrating than trying to get the staples to line up. So I've just sewn that in place, and now I'm going to go and flatten all of the staples, and then I can sew around the edge. When I'm sewing around the outside, I'm going to sew using a 1/4 inch seam allowance with a thread color that matches the exterior of my bag, making sure that I am sewing outside of where my staples are, and that I have flattened those down so that they don't get caught on my presser foot or on my feed dogs. I like to keep a pair of pliers handy, so if there's any that I still need to flatten down some more or even remove as I'm sewing, I can easily do that. I can also use my pliers so that at the curves I can make sure that my gusset is pulled properly out to the curve of my main panel. Go around the outside and remove all of those staples, and as you're doing so, check to make sure that your seam allowance is consistent, and also check if there are any areas that you need to go back over. For me, I'm looking at areas where there's extra bulk, like at the end of my zipper panel. Right here, I'm going to fix that little section here. And then I'm also going to check around the curves to make sure that the seam allowance is consistent there. If you've done basting stitches like I have here, you don't have to remove those, but make sure that you take out all of your staples. And when I'm checking my seam allowance to make sure that it is even, I'm looking at it from the main panel side, not the gusset side, as this is the shape that is going to form the finished shape of our bag. So that is where you want it to be most consistent. So if on one side it looks like it's pretty straight, but on the main panel side it's a little crooked, correct it based on the main panel side. Once you're happy with the consistency of your seam allowance and you have removed all of your staples, it is time to bind the first side of our bag. I know that a lot of people don't like binding, so I try to demonstrate different ways to do binding in my various videos so that you may find the way that you most prefer or least dislike. So today I'm going to be binding with waterproof canvas, but if you want to use the regular double fold bias binding as demonstrated in the written instructions for this pattern, I will put a link to the video I have for that in the description for you. I also have another video that shows you just doing a single fold binding. For this one, it's kind of a hybrid of those two methods. I have a length of waterproof canvas that is about 2 inches wide, just slightly under. And I've made a crease that is 3/8 of an inch from one of the long edges. I've just cut about a 30-degree angle at the end. That will be the beginning of my binding. And I'm going to fold that over 1/2 inch and place a crease so that I don't have a raw edge at the start. But being waterproof canvas, it won't fray. So you don't have to do that. You can leave it raw. I have done the angle so that it reduces the bulk in one section of the bag. And what I'm going to do is first sew around the same way as you would with double fold binding. And I'm going to sew this at 1/4 of an inch all the way around. Rather than baste it before I go, I'm just going to use a few clips to position that waterproof canvas. And I'm going to sew around the edge just inside that crease. And when I come to the curve, I'm going to put a few little snips in to help it ease around because waterproof canvas doesn't have any stretch. And I'm going to continue all the way around. When I sew this first row of stitches, I'm going to be sewing with a thread color that matches the exterior of my bag. And that is because these stitches will sit right around where this row of stitches is, and that will likely be seen when I turn the bag out. So rather than match my binding for this row of stitches, I want a thread color that matches my exterior so that if there are any visible stitches, it is less obvious than if I had a bright pink thread color. So I'm going to head over to my sewing machine and I'm going to be sewing along here. I'm going to use my zipper foot. I'm going to have my scissors handy to put those small clips in as we go around the curves. And we're going to sew that waterproof canvas in place. A couple of other suggestions to help you along with your binding are to sew with your zipper open, as that will help you compress your bag more easily, especially when you're sewing the second side. To start in a straight section of your bag. So for me, that can either be the top or the bottom. And the third thing is to start in a section of the bag that is less likely to be easily seen. So rather than start at the bottom of the bag that you will see when you look into the bag, if you start at the top underneath the zipper panel, it's less likely to be looked at on your finished bag. So folding over that first bit and just sewing around the edge at 1/4 of an inch. Back stitching at the beginning, sewing all the way around, and when I get to the curve, I will place some snips to ease that waterproof canvas around, and I'm going to move my clips as I go to keep my binding well positioned. Make sure that when you're sewing, you are sewing just inside the original line that we made in the fold of that waterproof canvas so that your stitches cannot be seen on the inside of your bag. And when you're finishing up, you want to make sure that you're sewing far enough beyond your starting point that you fully cover where the angled fold is on your waterproof canvas. And then you can gently veer your waterproof canvas so that it will gradually come in. You can even cut the excess off at this point. And just pull it down just a little bit, not too far from where your fold is here, but that will just stop when you fold it over from getting caught up. You can just straighten up that line. When you're happy with that line of stitches, you can trim the extra overhang of waterproof canvas where we started and where we finished. I also like to go and check where I have sewn that waterproof canvas in the fold to make sure that I cannot see any of my original stitch line. Then you can start pulling your binding over the raw edge. You're going to pull it out so that you have the fold where we placed our stitches and then the outside raw edge. And what we're going to do is fold this wider piece over the edge. We're not folding this under, although you can if you like. Folding that under makes it more like a traditional double fold bias tape, or you can just fold it flat, knowing that this is not going to fray. And if you keep it nice and wide like this, then when you sew on this side, you know you're going to catch the back. There won't be any areas that you have missed those stitches. So pull it all out, and then you're just going to fold it straight over and clip to keep that waterproof canvas snug against the bulk of that seam allowance. You're going to clip all the way around. I find it can be helpful to clip the straight sections first, the same way as we did when we were basting. And then when you come to the curve, you're just going to smooth it in and clip around. And the good thing about having the excess here on the inside is that in areas where you need a little bit more width, you have plenty of wiggle room. In this part here where we began, just fold over one side, keep that fold over. If you did the fold, tuck it around, and then you're just going to place a clip to keep that folded over. Just smooth it out as much as you can, hugging the seam allowance. Pop that curve out so that it is more convex than concave. You can clip it nicely in place, and then when you're going to sew it, you can tuck it in and it will be fairly evenly spaced. And when we sew around the outside, we're going to be sewing just inside that fold, knowing that we'll be catching this waterproof canvas on the back, but not sewing on the wrong side of our green stitch line, so that none of our stitches to secure the second side of our binding will be seen from the outside of our bag. And I'm going to be switching over to a thread color that will match this waterproof canvas. Sewing around at 3/8 of an inch, I am sewing with the folded side up and the side with the excess waterproof canvas at the back, so that I know that I'll be catching both layers. And I have switched over to a thread color that coordinates with my waterproof canvas. I am using a stitch length of 3, which is about a medium stitch length, and I'm going to backstitch at the beginning and sew all the way around. Flatten out your curve. For me, the important part is to be a consistent distance from the fold in that waterproof canvas, more so than at the curve here, because I've already made my main gusset seam. When I come back up to that starting point, I'm just going to make sure that the underside is tucked nicely beneath. I'm going to reinforce in that spot a little as I come back up to our starting point. After I've sewn around with the gusset side up, I'm going to check all of the corners to make sure that I'm happy with where the stitches are. I have two that I've actually needed to unpick because the waterproof canvas was bunched up, and I'm going to sew those again with the gusset side down so that I can see exactly where the stitches are going. And then coming up to this other corner where my stitches on this side are nice and even, but on this side, the seam allowance is just a little shallower. That's because of the curve here. I'm going to flatten that out and sew the curve again, but leaving the original stitch line in place because the waterproof canvas was smooth enough. I've sewn all around the edge and I've gone over the corners to make sure that I have the correct seam allowance on the main panel piece also. So in a couple of places there are 2 lines of stitches. I'm going to check the outside of the bag to make sure that I can't see any pink thread. And then I'm going to trim my threads here, and I'm also going to cut back this waterproof canvas, and I'm going to trim it so that there is about 1/8 of an inch beyond where that stitch line is, making sure that it is even, or as even as I can get it all the way around, knowing that it's not going to fray because it's the waterproof canvas, and that will cover up any of the visible stitch line from where we sewed our seam to join our gusset panel to the main panel. I like to use applique scissors to trim away the excess so that I am not worried about cutting my main panel. When you're happy with that, we can repeat the steps for the other side. First of all, basting our second main panel to the zipper gusset, sewing it in place, and then applying our binding. Knowing that I struggled a little bit on the first side, the way that I am going to baste my second main panel to the zipper gusset is by sewing along the top straight edge and the bottom straight edge. Then I will sew the sides in the straight section. Then I will clip my zipper gusset at the curves and ease that around. So the first thing for me to do is just baste these 2 straight edges in place. I have put basting stitches in the top and bottom straight sections, and now I'm going to baste the curves and the straight section at the side. I'm going to clip that gusset at the curves first to make sure that I have enough ease around the curve, and I want to do my best to get the side of the bag to line up at the same level as it does on the first side. So I'm just going to put small snips in my gusset circle. Then I'm going to clip around, but I am not going to be sewing the curve yet. I'm going to hand baste that knowing how much of a hard time we had on the first side. So I'm going to baste this straight section on my sewing machine, and then I will hand baste those curved corners. So a surprising thing happened. I was sewing this straight section here, and as I was doing it, I felt like my curve wasn't pulling away from the gusset like it had on the first side. So I actually was able to continue my basting stitches all the way around the curve, and then I went back and I did the lower curve. So I'm going to show you that on this side, as that is a lot faster and pretty easy way to get your basting done. So I'm starting in a straight section, so I have a gap at the top here where I have not done any of my basting stitches, and I'm just going to sew down the straight section. I am sewing with the main panel down, and I've got my pliers here just to help pull that gusset up. And because we've clipped those curves, and I guess also because we've got these straight edges in position, it's not pulling away anywhere near as much as it did previously. So just flatten that gusset out as we go around the curve. So that bottom curve is in position, and then I'll go and just close the last gap at the top here. You can see it's staying really nicely lined up with that curve, even without anything keeping it in place. So once I've basted all the way around, I can sew around with the full 1/4 of an inch seam allowance, and I'm going to be using my thread that matches the exterior of my bag. I'm going to apply the waterproof canvas the same way as I did on the first side. However, this time I'm going to sew it first to the main panel, not to the gusset, to see if that helps with the corners. So I've got my end folded over. I'm going to start at the top, and I'm going to sew just inside the fold. I'm going to clip at the curve here and continue all the way around until I've sewn it in place. Just going to place a couple of clips to get me started. And I'm going to be sewing this first line of stitches using a thread that is the same color as my exterior. So I'll clip just at the curves to ease that around. And I'll do the same on all 4 curves. Once you've sewn that waterproof canvas into place, check all of your curves and your seam lines to make sure that you are happy with how even they are and that there's no bunching up, particularly at the corners. And then the same way as we did on the first side, you're going to fold it out over your raw seam allowance and clip it in place. And then we're going to sew at 3/8 of an inch just inside where the fold is, and this time using a thread color that coordinates with the binding color as opposed to with the outside of the bag. Leaving this side long, and we will trim that off when we have sewn all the way around. We're going to be sewing inside the curve all the way around, and that will allow us to catch this waterproof canvas on the other side. So I did find this way it was a lot easier to get the smooth corners. I didn't have to unpick any of my stitches on the opposite side, but I have run a second line of stitches with the gusset side up just to make sure that it's nice and even all the way around. And now I will trim those threads and then trim back the excess waterproof canvas the same way as I did on the first side, just to finish up. Once that's all trimmed, turn your bag out through the main compartment. Press on your binding to get it to really take shape, particularly at the corner. Tuck it right in and then lay it flat against your gusset. Placing some clips on the outside edges for a little while can help it to keep its shape also. Just make sure that you are protecting your material underneath. And you are all finished. There will be a link to the pattern in the video description if you want to grab a copy for yourself. Hope that helps. Thanks, everyone.